Hello, everybody. I can already tell that I'm going to have a fine time. I'm going to have a fine time. I don't know about you, because the energy in this room is pretty darn good. Let me tell you a little bit about my program. And before I do that, I want to share a vision that I have for each one of you. And the vision I have for each one of you is that when you get up in the morning, your blood is singing at the thought of being who you are and doing what you do. That as you go through the day, you come radiantly alive several times, if not all the time. That you can almost go down to your knees in involuntary gratitude at the tremendous good fortune that's been bestowed on you. And I would like to suggest that if your life is not like that, then you're wasting your life. And life is altogether too short to be wasted. And what I'd like to share with you is that the vision I laid out is not a pipe dream. I'm not Pollyanna speaking. It can be achieved, and it can be achieved by you. So at the conclusion of the time we spent today, if I can leave you with two things. Number one, the notion that yes, it is possible to live like that, and I can do it. And number two, that if you determine you're not going to settle for anything less in your life, then we'll have spent a very profitable time together. Yes? No? Agree? So that's my goal. I must tell you that in my syllabus for the program that Charlie talked about, I state on the very first page that this program will profoundly change your life, and if it doesn't, we'll both have failed. Now that raises a lot of eyebrows. It's a business school course, for heaven's sake. You know, ever heard of a business school course changing your life? But I did mean that in all seriousness, and if you go to my website, you'll see the testimonials attesting to that. And let me tell you the reason why it happens. What I have done is I have taken the teachings of great spiritual masters, the greatest spiritual masters the world has ever known, who belong to different traditions, strode the earth at different times. And what I've done is I have stripped their teachings of religious, cultural, and other connotations and adapted them so that they are acceptable to intelligent people in a post-industrial society. Now, these were persons of immense stature who completely understood the human predicament, and their teachings have been tested over the millennia, and they absolutely work. So considering the source from which I have drawn my material, how could it not change your life? The only way you can go through my program and not have your life changed is if you don't do the exercises. If you don't do that, all bets are off. If you do the exercises conscientiously, your life will change. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. And the reason is not because I do anything magical, but because of the source from which I draw my material. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share some of the more powerful of those exercises, and you make up on concepts, so you make up your own mind on that, okay? So let me begin with the building blocks for my program. And the first building block is something I call mental chatter. And mental chatter is an internal monologue that you have going on in your head all the time. You've always had it. It begins each day right when you open your eyes, is with you throughout the day, is with you right now, when out of politeness you should be listening to my chatter and not your chatter, and is with you when you go to bed at night. And sometimes it's so loud you can't go to sleep. Anyone here have a problem going to sleep? Raise your hands if you do. What's your name? Your name, huh? Tom. Okay, Tom, I'm going to share with you an exercise today which has got a 100% record of solving that particular problem. And if I forget, you're going to remind me. Okay? Okay, so what is mental chatter? You know, it's the kind of thing that goes, well, what do I have to do now? Oh, you know, there's this guy who's going to come and give a talk. It's probably going to be boring. Charlie has this immense habit of picking mediocre speakers and telling us they're great. Yeah, he's so out of touch with reality. You know, he thinks Next Jump is going to be the next Google. It's a coupon company, for heaven's sake. Forget the next Google. It's not even going to be the next Groupon. Why can't he make peace with that? All of that stuff is mental chatter. You've always had it. It's like an unwelcome relative who's shown up at your house and you can't throw him out. I see a number of you nodding, so you recognize, yes, this is there. Now, what we do is we try to live our lives in spite of our mental chatter. We suppress it, ignore it, work our way around it. Big mistake. And the reason it's a big mistake is that we construct our life with our mental chatter. We think we live in a real world. We don't. We live in a construct. And if you've seen the Matrix, the original Matrix, we all live in the Matrix. The only difference is we built it ourselves with our mental chatter. It wasn't some alien civilization out to enslave us. That's how important mental chatter is. The second concept is something called a mental model. And a mental model is a notion we have that this is the way the world works. And we all have mental models. We've got dozens of mental models. Maybe we've got hundreds of mental models. We've got a model for how do I get a job? How do I get ahead in my job? How do I find a person to marry? How do I bring up my children? How do I pick a restaurant to eat at, a movie to go to? Some of these models may be in conflict with each other, and we may or may not be aware of this conflict. Okay? The important thing, by the way, mental models are wonderful things. There's nothing wrong with having mental models. They help us make sense of unstructured situations. They save us time. The problem is not that we have mental models. The problem is that we don't recognize that we have mental models. We think this is the way the world works. But this is not the way the world works. This is our notion of this is the way the world works. And the more you invest in your notion of this is the way the world works, the more evidence you seem to get from outside that this in fact is the way the world works. And this sets up a self-reinforcing cycle, and very soon you build a silo around yourself that's so thick that you can't break out of it. Now let's see if I can make this real. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to outline a situation to you, and I don't want you to just listen to me. I want you to actually put yourself in that situation. Okay? Will you work with me on that? So here's the deal. You're going to an important meeting, and you're driving. Got that? You're going to an important meeting and you're driving, and you are running late. Okay? Not only are you running late, but you are stuck in a traffic jam. Not just a run-of-the-mill traffic jam, but the mother of all traffic jams. Got that? So put yourself in a situation. Going to an important meeting, you're running late, you're driving, you got stuck in a traffic jam. And not only are you stuck in a traffic jam, but it's one of those wonderful New York summers where the thermometer has just crested 100 degrees and the air conditioning in your car has broken down. Okay, now put yourself in that situation. Going to an important meeting, driving, running late, stuck in a traffic jam, extraordinarily hot, and all of a sudden somebody cuts in front of you and almost causes an accident. And then he cuts in front of another car in front of you and almost causes another accident. What are your feelings towards the driver of that car?
Unpleasant.
Would it be safe to say that loving kindness is not it? You all agree that loving kindness is not it, okay? Road rage may have been invented in California, but it's traveled to New York and is quite alive and well here. Now let me share some information with you. The driver of this car that cut you off so rudely has just received news that his son has been involved in a very serious accident and has to be operated on immediately. He has no knowledge of whether or not he will ever see his son alive again and is desperately trying to get to the hospital. So what happens when I share that information with you? Can you almost physically feel your rage and frustration drain out of you to be replaced by compassion for a fellow human being in an unfortunate predicament?
Sure.
You can, right? Any of you? You can feel it drain out? Okay. But the point is, you don't really know whether the guy who cut you off was an inconsiderate jerk or a distraught father, right? Now that I've raised this possibility, it is possible that you could take the approach, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to hire a private investigator to look into the matter and report back to me. And if he reports back to me that the guy was a distraught father, I will feel great compassion. And if he reports back to me that the guy was an inconsiderate jerk, I'll get really pissed off. But until I know for sure, I'm going to remain neutral. It's possible that you could take that approach, but I think it's extremely unlikely. Agreed? So the practical matter is, you don't really know whether the guy who cut you off was a distraught father or an inconsiderate jerk, right? But the bigger point is it really doesn't matter. You have the choice of determining which is the emotional domain that you are going to occupy. In all likelihood, until I just explicitly pointed it out to you right now, you did not even recognize that you have the choice and you exercise that choice. But if you think about it, I think you will admit that yes, you did have a choice and you exercised the choice and you did it instinctively without knowing that you had done so. And the important point is that there are dozens of times every day. Let me repeat that. There are dozens of times every day when you face such a decision point in your life. And in many of those, perhaps the majority of those, you choose to occupy a domain which leaves you angry, frustrated, rejected, and in a not very nice place, and you never recognize that you have chosen to occupy that domain. And the reason you do that, by the way, is because of your mental chatter and because of your mental models. Now, at some turning point, the two most important turning points are your birthday and New Year's Day. You kind of go something like, from now on things are going to be different. I'm going to eat healthy, exercise regularly, quit procrastinating, stop smoking. And if you've done that, how long does it last? Typically not very long, right? There's a reason why exercise clubs sign up many times more members than they can handle in December. They know come January there'll be plenty of time, plenty of room on the treadmill sign-up sheets. The reason is most of us try to bring about profound change by an effort of will. Darn it, I will quit smoking. I will pass up on dessert. I will go to the gym and work out. Every time you try to bring about profound behavioral change by an effort of will, you're doing violence to yourself. Odds are very good you won't succeed, but even if you do, because you've got an extraordinarily strong will, there probably will be a byproduct that you're not very happy about. So, for example, you stop smoking cold turkey, you eat too much, you put on weight. In the system that I'm going to share with you, profound behavioral change comes about and it lasts. And the reason it lasts is because it doesn't come about by an exercise of will. It comes about because you systematically examine your mental models and make changes in them. And as you make changes in your mental models, you view the world differently and you quite literally become a different person. And as you become a different person, you don't really have to think about behavioral change. It happens automatically as a byproduct. Let me go on to the third building block. The third building block is what I call the me-centered universe. Now, all of you heard of Galileo? Galileo is a guy who got into a spot of trouble a few hundred years ago because he postulated that perhaps the sun does not move around the earth, perhaps the earth moves around the sun. Well, each one of you is convinced that Galileo got it wrong. The earth does not move around the sun. It revolves around you personally. And you're all deadly convinced about that. I see some smiles. I'm not entirely joking when I said that. Think about how, no matter how quickly, no matter what happens, you very quickly bring it down into what's the impact on me. No matter what happens. Your spouse gets a great job offer, and you think, Jay, how's this going to affect our relationship? Your boss leaves the company, And you say, gee, you know, who's the new person going to be and what's my relationship going to be with that person? Or possibly, am I going to get promoted or is it that turkey down the hall? Your daughter drops out of high school to begin an in-depth exploration of controlled substances. And you say, gee, you know, what will they think about my parenting? Think about it. Do you or do you not, no matter what happens, very quickly bring it down to what's the impact on me? You know, there's a tragedy in some part of the world and you call up the toll-free number to make a contribution and very quickly move to how dare they put me on hold for so long? We live in a me-centered universe. And what I'd like to share with you about a me-centered universe is if that is where you spend the majority of your time, then you are going to live, by and large, a mediocre, frustrated existence. There will be flashes of pleasure, but by and large, you will live a mediocre existence. And the only way you can get out of that is if you are part of a cause which is considerably bigger than you are, and which brings a greater good to a greater community. That's important. So let me repeat that. You're part of something which brings a greater good to a greater community. And you have tremendous flexibility in defining both the greater good and the greater community. But unless you find something like that to which you can devote your life, or if not your life, at least a big chunk of it, you are going to be, by and large, living a mediocre existence. That is just the way it is. The bad news is that we are so entrenched in living in a me-centered universe, and culturally, you know, you're always told to look out for number one, and go ahead, be competitive, and win at any cost, and all the rest of that. Culturally, we are pushed towards living in a me-centered universe, so it's very difficult to break out of it. That's the bad news. The good news is that even a very modest stride you make out of that will have a huge payoff in your life. And it's really not that difficult sharing some of the things that I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit later. So let me tell you a story. Medieval England, site of a great cathedral being built, and the architect was going to the construction site and he passed three people, all of whom were doing the exact same thing. Big block of stone, he put a smaller block of stone on the big block of stone and beat it with a hammer till it broke. And he asked the first person, what are you doing? They said, can't you see, I'm breaking rocks. Well, why are you doing it? Because I get paid a half a day. And the second guy said because that he was building a wall behind him. And the third person said, you know, I'm helping build a great cathedral. And when it is done, people are going to come from all over the world and they will be inspired. And I will have had a small role to play in this. And the third one was the only one who recognized the architect, and he said, truth be told, I don't like doing this. It is backbreaking labor, and I can get more wages for less effort. And I'm only doing it because I want to learn. Will you teach me to build a cathedral? And 20 years from that date, the guy who was breaking rocks was dead. The guy who was helping build the wall behind him was living a life of desperate poverty. But the guy who was helping build a cathedral was on his way towards building his first cathedral. Now that is a choice that each one of you has every day. You can break rocks or you can build a cathedral. I cannot define the cathedral that you are building. You are the only person who can define the cathedral that you are building. But I can tell you that unless you define the cathedral that you are building and feel comfortable with it and anchor yourself in it, you're either burnt out or you're heading towards burnout. And the only way, by the way, in which you're going to be able to do this is if you live your life simultaneously on two different levels. And you have to simultaneously live your life at the 6-inch level and the 50,000-foot level. And at the 6-inch level, which is where unfortunately we spend a great deal of our time, is, oh my God, what do I have to do? Which are the emails that I have to respond to? Which are the calls that I have to return? What's the report that I have to do? And what is it on my to-do list that's absolutely urgent? I have to knock it off. Are you all concerned about stuff like that? That's the 6-inch level. And the 6-inch level is important. I'm not saying it's not important. But I'm saying that if you spend all your time at the 6-inch level, you're heading towards burnout. Because simultaneously, you've got to be at the 50,000 foot levels. And the 50,000 foot level, you see very clearly where you're going, where the potential roadblocks are, where you need to make a diversion so you can go around the roadblock, basically where you can steer the ship of your life. And it's not enough for you to be at one of those levels. You have to be on both simultaneously. Now think of it, it's a little bit like a mother and the child comes in, the child has a cold, so the mother is blowing the nose and taking care of the child. At the same time, she is, at the back of her mind, knows that what she's really doing is developing a human being who one day is going to be president of the country. So same principle. So you have to live your life simultaneously on both of those levels. And when you do that and you're anchored at the 50,000 foot level, much of what you're doing at the 6-inch level becomes clearer. We get very frustrated at the 6-inch level, by the way, because the 6-inch level is where all the aggravation that you face on a daily basis is. But when you are also at the 50,000 foot level, you'll find that much of the aggravation goes away. You've all heard of the classic immigrant story, right? Guy comes to the country, doesn't speak the language, gets a menial job washing dishes in a restaurant, something like that. And 20 years from that day, he owns a chain of restaurants and is a wealthy member of the community, brought all his relatives over from the old country. All of you heard of that? Classic immigrant story. How did it happen? Because when he was washing dishes, he really wasn't washing dishes. He was helping or ensuring that his kids had a better life than he ever did. That's why it's so crucial for you to anchor yourself in a grand vision. As I said, you're the only person who can define that grand vision for yourself. But that is one of the most important things that you can do. Let me share with you something that each one of you does, and you probably do it many times every day, and it is highly deleterious to your well-being. So what is it that you do and many times every day which is highly deleterious to your well-being? Something happens to you and you stick a label on it, and the two particular labels I'm interested in are good thing and bad thing. You're very rarely neutral about it. Something happens to you and you immediately classify it as slightly good or slightly bad. Think about it for a while, because this is important. Yes, no. Even a simple thing, you're working late and you go to the coffee machine and there's only the dregs left. So if you want coffee, you have to wash out the pot and brew a fresh. Oh, this is a bad thing. Your spouse calls and tells you that your in-laws are going to be coming for dinner on Friday. This is a bad thing. They're possibly staying over for the weekend. This is a very bad thing. No matter what happens, you immediately decide, don't you, whether this is good or bad? Now, here's something I want you to think about. Can you go back as long as you need to in your life, but can you ever remember an occasion when something happened that at the time it happened you thought this is terrible, but now looking back upon it with the perspective of time and perhaps greater wisdom, you can say, hey, this actually was a pretty good thing. Can you recall that? I want a show of hands here. How many of you can recall such an instance? Quite a few of you can remember that. Okay. Now here's a question. If somewhere in the past something happened that at that time you thought was bad, but you can now look upon it and say, hey, this was actually good. Is it possible, is it just barely possible that what today you are about to classify as bad could sometime in the future turn out to be a good thing? Is it possible? And if there is the slightest possibility that what you're about to classify as bad could at some time in the future turn out to be good, why are you in a hurry to label it bad? This is actually pretty profound, so think about it for a while. Why are you in a hurry to label it bad? Because here's something for you to remember. When an event happens in you, it does not cause suffering. Let me repeat that. When an event happens, it does not cause suffering. Suffering arises when you label that event bad. You lose a major customer. Okay, you lose a major customer. You have vacant slots. You got unused capacity. But you lose a major customer. Oh my God, we lost a major customer. What's going to happen to revenues? What's going to happen to earnings? Am I going to have to are there going to be layoffs? This is terrible. And suffering begins at that instant. Yes, no. I remember when I was teaching at London Business School at the time, and there were students of mine who got a job in the City of London. The City of London is the London equivalent of Wall Street. And one of them worked for a hedge fund, and when the financial crisis hit, he was let go. And he was really annoyed for maybe 10 minutes, and then he got on with his life. And then 6 months later, the crisis got worse, and his entire department was let go. But he was one of the early persons to let go, so he got a very healthy severance. All of those who got let go later got nothing. So he said, boy, was I lucky to have been let go when I got let go. So you never really know whether anything that happens to you is good or bad. But one thing I can assure you, the moment you decide that it is bad, you will begin to suffer. But if you stop, you don't even have to say it's a good thing. If you just ask yourself the question, is there any possible way in which it perhaps could be good? That will change your perspective. And if you then take the next step as, is there anything that I can do to actually make it good? You will find that you have a completely different perspective on all of the ups and downs which are a regular part of everybody's life. And this is true in your business life, and it is true in your personal life. And there is something else that I'm going to share with you which will help in that. What we do is, our innate nature, by the way, is to be happy. In fact, happiness is hardwired into us. It's part of our DNA. But most of us do not experience our real nature, which is happiness. Most of us experience, gee, my life sucks. At least some of the time, or most of the time. Ever wondered why that is? That is because we have quite literally spent our entire lives learning to be unhappy. And I'm really serious about that. We've spent our entire lives learning to be unhappy. And how do we learn to be unhappy? Remember, I talked to you earlier about mental models, and mental models is a notion we have that this is the way the world works. Well, there's one particular mental model that all of us have bought into with every fiber of our being. And the mental model that we're brought into is, I have to get something so I can do something, so I can be something. I have to get a great deal of money so I can go on exotic vacations, so I can be happy. I have to be in a relationship so I can have great sex, so I can be happy. All of these are variations of the if-then model. And the if-then model basically states, if this happens, then I will be happy. And in this room, if you look around, for all of you, the major ways in which you are different, apart from physical characteristics and so on, is what is the particular set of ifs that you are focusing on. If only I had a bigger house. If only I became president. If only my in-laws moved to Australia. If only my wife wouldn't nag me when I sit down to watch football. If only my husband would do the dishes at least twice a week. If only. We're all very busy trying to fix other people, and right now in your life, you're all trying to fix someone, trying to fix spouses, children, parents, siblings, colleagues, co-workers. How much luck have you had fixing someone who doesn't want to be fixed? Probably not a whole lot. It is possible for you to get to the point where if this happens, wonderful. If this doesn't happen, still wonderful. What you've done is you've severed the if-then link. And the way in which you can sever the if-then link is not to be obsessively focused on the outcome. From a very young age, we have been taught to be goal seekers, goal strivers. Your parents, teachers, coaches probably told you, Alfred, you're a good boy, and what you should do is set a goal for yourself. And if you look at your life, you'll find that you've always been setting goals for yourself and then trying to take actions which will help you achieve those goals. And some of the times you succeeded, and some of the times you didn't succeed. And at least some of the time you reached a destination which was diametrically opposed to the one you set out to reach. Right? That's the story of your life. We live our lives on the basis, I set a goal, I reached it, life's a blast. I set a goal, I failed, life sucks. If you live your life like that, you're always going to be going through cycles, and you'll be spending much of your time down, or much of the time you will be in a downward spiral. And the only way out of that is for you to recognize that goals are extremely important, but goals are extremely important only insofar as they set direction. Once the direction has been established, forget about the goals and pour all of your emotional energy into what do you have to do to accomplish the goals. Whether or not you will accomplish the goal is outside your control. You can take all of the appropriate actions, and yet for some reason which is totally outside your control, you cannot reach your goal. Is that correct? So the only thing that is within your control are the actions. So you will do the very best you can and pour yourself into the actions. And if you succeed, wonderful. If you don't succeed, still wonderful. What you've done is you've severed the if-then link. John Wooden was the first guy to make the Basketball Hall of Fame, both as a player and as a coach. And he led UCLA to an unprecedented number of victories in the NCAA. And one of the things he used to say, I'm paraphrasing here, is whenever he started working with a new team, he never spoke about winning or outscoring opponents. He always spoke about when it's over and you look in the mirror, did you do the best that you were capable of? If you did the best you were capable of, then the score really doesn't matter. But if you did the best you were capable of, I fancy you'll find the score to your liking. That is a perfect articulation of invest in the process, do not invest in the outcome. And this will pay you huge dividends in your personal life and in your professional life. Let me end with a story. There are several versions of this story, but I like the one that I'm about to share with you. Native American story. So there was this young boy who was growing up, and he was about to take his place as an adult in the tribe, and he was talking to the medicine man. And the medicine man told him, here is this dog, loving, kind, intelligent, trustworthy. And here is this wolf, malevolent, vicious, cruel, ready to strike at, bite, kill anyone. and the dog and the wolf are both inside you. And the dog and the wolf are fighting. And the brave asks, who's going to win? And the medicine man says, whichever one you feed. Now think about that. In each one of us, there are altruistic, noble, let's help each other and save the world impulses. And in each one of us, there are selfish, what's in it for me, and how can I get more for myself, and to hell with everybody else impulses. And they're both there, and they're both alive and well. And it is your job to selectively identify and feed the dog inside you. Now, don't get carried away and think that you're only going to feed the dog and not going to feed the wolf, because that's not going to happen. The best that you can hope for is that you will feed the dog much more than you feed the wolf. And if you do that, then the dog will become stronger and stronger. But I would like to extend that and say it is also your job to selectively identify and feed the dog in the other person, everybody you come into contact with. And you come into contact with your colleagues, you come into contact with random people like the cabbie who takes you to wherever you're going, or the newspaper vendor from whom you buy your paper. For each one of them, is there anything that you could do to make him or her stronger, more fulfilled, feel better about his or her day? When you do that, you're feeding the dog in that person. When you do that to your colleague, you're feeding the dog there. And the funny thing is, if you do that long enough and consistently enough, the dog in you becomes friends with the dog in the other person, and then magic happens in the workplace. And this is something you have to experience to see how powerful it is. Thank you.